Milwaukee Avenue, street, highway, melting pot. From the corner of Kinsey and Des Plaines all the way to Devon Avenue, Milwaukee Avenue spans 12 miles of street across the city, encompassing years of Polish and Latino history, and more recently, gentrification. Even before Europeans set foot on the swamps of Lake Michigan, Milwaukee Avenue was a highway of sorts. Along with several other of the city's expansive diagonal boulevards, Milwaukee Avenue was used as a trail by Native American tribes. Since then, it's been a hub of chain migration, where various ethnicities found their livelihood and created universes of their own in the midst of Chicago. Milwaukee Avenue is a path through Chicago's history, an ethnic freeway through time. Chicago itself was founded in 1833, and Milwaukee Avenue played an important role in the city's infancy. Much of where Milwaukee Avenue now presently lies was farmland and farm buildings. During the 1840s, a makeshift thoroughfare of planks, called Plank Road, was constructed so that farmers could come into the city and sell goods. Even then, the road had high traffic.
So this is the first stop, Eastern European folks when they came to America. The second largest Polish community in the world, which is in Chicago. And that's the stop there.
Poles were one of many groups that built up this city, especially this neighborhood. Right now, it's called Noble Square, where the museum is. But at one point, it was called the Old Polish Downtown, which was not only Noble Square, but it was Wicker Park, Bucktown, Humboldt Park, really all the way up to the river. Poles first started coming here in late 1800s, 1870s was the first major wave of Polish immigrants. This was called the za chlebem immigration, which means for bread in Polish. This reflects the situation in Europe at the time. Firstly, Poland didn't have an independent state between 1795 and 1918. Poland was occupied between the Russian, Prussian, and Austro-Hungarian empires. As the name suggests, the for bread immigration, it was a poor economic situation for Poland. There were famines, people were starving, Poles were being conscripted into the partitioning powers' armies. In 1871, I think, was the Franco-Prussian War. Poles were being conscripted into the Prussian army, which they had no interest in dying for the Prussians. They were fighting against the French, with whom Poland had very good relations with. That was another reason pushing them away from Europe. Things that were pulling them specifically to Chicago was all the work that was here. After the fire, you see the steel industry taking off in the city. During that time, the largest steel manufacturers in the world were the Russian Empire and the Prussian Empire. So you already had these skilled Polish laborers from Europe who were coming and working in the mills. Railroads, anything going east to west, had to come through Chicago, stockyards on the south side. Anyway, during this immigration is when, that's when this neighborhood was established, which the center of it used to be the Polonia Triangle, which is still called today. That's Milwaukee, Ashland, and Division. At one point, especially during that time, all Polish shops along the streets, most of the churches in this area were Polish. People used to speak Polish just on the streets. And that continued through the Second World War.
Because you start getting Polish refugees raised, basically. People who had served in the Polish army in the West. You know, much Polish army had come to England and France. These people did not want to return to a Sovietized Poland, to a communist Poland, so they came here, and they were of a different social class. And of course, they did not speak po Chicagosku. They didn't speak in the Chicago manner. They spoke in the manner of educated Poles. And so right from the very beginning, there was this clash between the older Polonia, the peasant Poland, and this sort of upper class or middle class Polish refugees, who would say things like, and in fact this just happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I was talking to the daughter of one of these people, and she said, well, my father was on Milwaukee Division in Ashland, and he asked a question in Polish to somebody on the street, and the guy answered him in this strange Chicago dialect, and he says, that's it, I'm not living with these people, with these peasants, and he moved out. So the social class thing and the new immigration thing was very, very strong. And once again, that division sort of healed itself over time, so that the fraternal organizations, the churches, etc., these people finally came together after a few years. And then you had the solidarity immigration. And oh my God, the solidarity immigration, because here were these people who were raised under communism, right? And so the older Polish leaders would say, oh, these are communists, they don't understand, they don't know what freedom is, they weren't raised in the manner of the old Poland, the real Poland, which means pre-1939 Poland.
Just came from totally different worlds. Just politically, the situation in Poland was different. Physically, so much of the country was destroyed. These Poles who grew up, or who came in the 1980s, who grew up after the Second World War, they went to university, they were more educated in things like mathematics, science, things that were not known by some of these older generations who were mostly peasants, they were farmers. So just like any other immigrant community, they came here looking to find someone they could associate with, who they could identify with, and they just couldn't identify with the old community. And this is when they went a little bit further up Milwaukee, up by like Milwaukee and Central Park Road, which is now Logan or Avondale. But really Belmont and Central for a while became the epicenter of this new Polish neighborhood in the 1980s through the 1990s. Since younger Poles didn't want to come to this neighborhood anymore, the Polish identity of the neighborhood disappeared after a while.
Beginning in the 1970s, Latino residents started to move into the neighborhoods surrounding Milwaukee Avenue. Most Latinos were of Puerto Rican or Mexican descent. Like the existing white residents, many Latinos were employed in blue-collar jobs, factory, manufacturing, or assembly line work. Despite their common economic situation, in many cases, white residents were vehemently opposed to the introduction of Latino people to the neighborhood. White gangs, like the Chi West or the Gaylords, would try to keep Latinos out through violence or intimidation. In response, many Latinos banded together to create gangs, sparking a larger gang war along racial lines. By the 1980s, Latinos represented a numerical majority, and Latino gangs dominated the avenue. As before, the community struggled with open drug dealing, prostitution, and violence. Juan Johnny Elias, a volunteer for First Ward Alderman Proco Joe Moreno, lived this story. As a boy, he faced discrimination from whites, struggled to coexist with gangs, and now lives with his wife in the same neighborhood where he grew up.
We moved in Logan Square in about 1977. I was probably about 5th or 6th grade. The area was, when we first moved in, was dominated by a couple white gangs. Young kids like me and my brother going to the store and being told we didn't belong here, getting jumped. It was a hatred. It was a hatred. They did not want to see us here. Then more Latino families bought into the neighborhood. The neighborhood got really bad. There was an element that there was a lot going on. I'd be, as a young man, I fell into that too, but not hardcore. I was more like a wannabe and just, wanted to fit in. But I stuck with school, and I stuck with having a stepdad that's a policeman that, wasn't having much of that. But nevertheless, the environment was, it was dangerous. It became much more dangerous. People would be up on the roof with rifles in certain spots. Western Avenue was a dividing line between opposing Latin gangs at that point. The white gangs kind of had moved on. They kind of stuck around, but they were getting smaller. And there was a lot of violence.
So there's this constant kind of fissure also in that community, and the gang life there was very strong among the Puerto Rican community, because gangs are really the defensive arm of a community. They are really the sort of military defensive arm of a community, and they present themselves in much that same way. And of course now with gangs, there's the drug issue, and they're much better armed than they were in 1929, or even in the 1950s or 1960s. So the gang issue became a problem. I believe in 1977 there was a riot in Humboldt Park near Milwaukee Avenue, the Puerto Rican riot, which was, in some ways disastrous for the community. So this kind of tension continues to play itself out, though in the last few years it has seemed to go down a bit in that neighborhood, but largely I think because the neighborhood has become one more Mexican.
The schools, the churches, and the parks in our community have always been pretty strong, with a lot of participation. I think that's one thing. I think block clubs, they had to come together and band together to say enough with the violence, enough with the craziness and the open air drug markets. Those things really brought people together.
Beginning in the 1990s, Milwaukee Avenue again experienced large demographic change. Artists and students moved into the neighborhood, specifically in Bucktown in search of cheap living and working spaces. An explosion of bohemian culture changed the face of the neighborhood. Soon, an influx of wealthy residents spread to the southeast areas of Milwaukee Avenue. Pricey restaurants, shops, and nightclubs replaced Polish and Latino businesses, which had once studded the avenue. Latinos, who had been the neighborhood majority in Westtown in the early 90s, only comprised 47% of the population by 2000. Real estate prices skyrocketed, leaving previous neighborhoods residents to be priced out. As a result, lower-income residents and businesses of the street moved north and west to be able to pay their rent. Eric Williams, a longtime Bucktown resident and owner of the Silver Room, a jewelry store on Milwaukee Avenue, bore witness to this gentrification. Williams first moved to Milwaukee Avenue in the early 90s and established his business there in 1997.
20 years ago, I moved to the neighborhood in 91, 92. At the time, it was already kind of changing. I mean, things are constantly changing. It was the end of a lot of the older businesses, meaning the 70s, 80s businesses. A lot of Puerto Rican, Polish immigrant neighborhood. It was a little rough. You had some gangs still happening around there. You had the beginnings of the alternative, folks, the piercings, the tattoos, mainly because of the location of the train. It's a train on the corner of Damon and Milwaukee, and that was a big deal. You can get anywhere in the city from that train stop. And Milwaukee Avenue has a lot of big spaces above the storefronts, so that was another thing. So because of space, location, and it was a part of the city that was kind of left to its own devices. You never felt like there was no policing over there. I used to park my car on Milwaukee Avenue for literally 3 years in an alley and never got one ticket. So it was like kind of nobody cared about the neighborhood, so it wasn't over policed. It was freedom. You had space that brings upon artists. So now artists can go in there, they can paint and do their work in their cheap spaces that are big, and that was the development of the community. I feel like people always follow the artists, it's cool. Everyone wants, if you can't be cool, you can at least live next to somebody who's cool. Those who had a little bit of foresight, wow, I can get a space over here, I need to buy this space. So now you buy a space. Now, these artists that are there, they might want to drink coffee. Wow, okay, let me open a coffee shop, so to begin. And now you go to this coffee shop, their friends are in town, now you got a little bit more business, blah, blah. Now they're hungry, you get a restaurant, But the restaurants that are built there are built for those people who live there. So they're artsy, they're kind of hip, blah, blah, blah. You go to this restaurant, now all they need to buy some clothes. Oh, wow, So that's what happens. Gradually, you start seeing the development of business on Milwaukee Avenue. The corridor, especially from the 1400 block to Milwaukee and Damon. So I'm like, if we can keep a mix of these national corporations and local businesses, that would be kind of cool. So 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, for me, 2005, 6, 7, I was like, this is starting to go south. I mean, I hate to say this, but you never saw like a white girl with a baby walking down the street, a white lady with a baby. you saw like teenagers, black and Puerto Ricans pushing babies. You see this 35-year-old white lady walking up with a baby, you're like, okay. And then now even worse is like, now they're looking at you like, what are you doing here? That's what it really is, the attitude. It's like, hey, you just moved here like last year, like, you know. So I feel like that's when you started seeing these people trying to like, relegate, like, who are you, man, you know? And you come in and you oppose your will in this neighborhood the way you want it to be in your mind right away. I mean, I don't know anybody who still lives there, honestly, from a few people, but most people left, man, because yeah, either they got priced out or I just left because it just was boring. It's not exciting anymore, you know. Even I go up there now, it's bland. It's not fun at all. So yeah, I just think that's the general vibe of feeling like, you know, you could be weird or gangbanger or black or white or gay or whatever. It didn't really matter. I think that was just the general vibe, you know. You kind of like just did your own thing, you know.
I moved back to Chicago from Madison, Wisconsin, where I had been working and went to college previously, about 10 years ago. And when I moved back to Chicago, I moved in with an old high school friend, and we moved into the Ukrainian Village, which is a little south of Milwaukee. I lived just a block or two north of Chicago Avenue, right around Damon. Like when I think of Milwaukee Avenue 10 years ago, for me, I was younger, you know, in my mid-20s, and really had not lived in Chicago ever. I grew up in Oak Park, Illinois, which is a suburb. So for me, the city was kind of monolithic. The city was just a one big concept in my head that I didn't understand. And when I finally moved in to live in the city and started understanding different neighborhoods and how each block felt different, Milwaukee Avenue always stood out to me as a place where things were a little edgier, people were a little cooler. I saw a lot more tattoos than I had been around growing up. There were record stores and, you know, punk rock bands playing on weeknights, and like, what is this? I don't understand. But there were also coffee shops and restaurants, and I would go to Ragstock to look for stuff for Halloween costumes. And slowly became much more comfortable walking up and down that stretch and feeling not necessarily that I belonged. I still have this consciousness of somebody who is not truly of the city, even though I live in the city, but that it was a place that I could understand. You know, I probably am part of the process of gentrification for that stretch of the street. You know, I wasn't renting a studio apartment and working in the service industry and creating art, you know, writing, painting, something on the side. I wasn't living that bohemian lifestyle. I was really going and consuming those aspects. But, you know, I was in grad school and I'm, you know, working my way up professionally, and then all of a sudden I'm a young professional, I'm a teacher, and I have disposable income, and maybe I'm going to nicer bars. Maybe I'm paying $5 for a beer instead of $3 now, or whatever. And so I could easily see how, you know, somebody like me, I didn't drive that change toward what Milwaukee is becoming. And it's not necessarily becoming better or worse, it's just change, but I definitely was part of it. But I mean, for me, when I think of Chicago, one of the most quintessential Chicago places for me is the Damon Blue Line stop. That to me feels like it has the energy of the city of Chicago. You can get off that stop, and there used to be, now there's Big Star right there, which I love. Great tacos, but there used to be, before Big Star, there was a place called Pontiac Cafe, which had these great cheeseburgers, and it was kind of a biker bar, and it was nowhere near the scene that Big Star is now. You could always go to Pontiac and get a table outside, or you could always get a burger. And so that corner, that area, that Six Corners, for me really feels like Chicago. For me, I've seen that stretch change even over just the last 10 years. I remember when I first started walking up and down that stretch, or especially biking it, always feeling like the Urban Outfitter. I was like, wait, there's an Urban Outfitter on this stretch? That doesn't seem to fit in. One of these things is not like the other. But now it feels like that whole stretch of Milwaukee really is going toward condos and boutiques, that sort of thing. So I think in terms of what I may have contributed, aside from being a consumer of used books and going to some of those bars and some of those shops, to me, I try to be cognizant of the fact that gentrification is not homogenous. It doesn't happen in the same way in every single place. It doesn't happen inevitably. It doesn't happen everywhere. And that different neighborhoods have different levels of advocacy in terms of retaining rights and space for prior residents, in terms of retaining cultural identity. So I have seen Wicker Park really change in 10 years. You know, there are going to be some people who make an awful lot of money out of Milwaukee Avenue, but it's not going to be necessarily the people who are living on that stretch right now. There are going to be people who are really excited about living in what to them is their version of the big city. And some of that will look and feel like what my version of the big city is, but some will be very, very different.
And my perspective is of the longtime Latino homeowners that I engage with, for the most part, are welcoming of other people. But I think that there's this hysteria and this effort to stem off economic development, to stem off inclusion, and having non-Latinos live amongst us in the neighborhood, and there's just this fear that it's going to be like bad for the neighborhood, and we're being pushed out. And I don't know that that's entirely the case. When I see the future of Milwaukee Avenue, is I see a business like Dos Amigos that's located on Milwaukee and Belden, who at one time wanted to sell their property because it was rough, it was bad. And now see this economic development coming that I doubt they're going to sell anytime soon, right? Because the place stays full. I think the people that come in to the neighborhood want that diversity in goods that they purchase at the store. I think they want that diversity in food that they eat. I think they want the diversity in the music that comes. I think they want that, right? I think people come to Logan Square to get that piece. And with what the Alderman is doing here, within this economic development, there's a piece or pieces that allow for people with modest to low income to be able to stay in the neighborhood. And I think that's crucial that we have leaders like our Alderman that's actually able to find the tools to say that this thing is not just going to be overtaken by money, but instead use money and economic development to build something for people that want to remain here or people that want to move back.
Let me take the corner of Milwaukee and Damon Avenue. When I was in college, there was 2 Polish restaurants right there. There were several bars that were Polish, several that were Hispanic, mostly Puerto Rican bars. Now there are poetry slams on the corner of Milwaukee Division and Damon Avenue. And there are Columbia College students. My students live in the neighborhood and to go to these poetry slams. And Wicker Park has become very hot area for gentrification purposes. Real estate is making a lot. I mean, this was the neighborhood that was the home of the Haymarket Martyrs. This was a working class grunt neighborhood with a lot of grit to it for most of its history. And now you're getting poetry slams, and you're getting Italian, major Italian restaurants, and there's a vegetarian restaurant on Division just west of Ashland Avenue. That's the end of Milwaukee Avenue as far as I know Milwaukee Avenue, but it's the beginning of something else. If you want to think about it, if you read the Nelson Algren books about Division Street, I mean, it was a rough, tough gamblers' neighborhood. There were heroin addicts. There were, and the Polish community got very upset about those novels, but they were telling the truth of what happened on that street. That's all gone. I mean, you've got a vegetarian restaurant there. I saw 1 Polish bar on Division Street, I think 1 Spanish bar the last time I was there. All I saw was people dressed very elegantly, sitting in outdoor restaurants, sipping white wine, and I knew it was over.
So if nothing else, the history, there's been a lot of movement, a lot of gentrification, but I think the history will remain there.
Certainly, Milwaukee Avenue has gone through its fair share of changes, both ethnic and economic. As gentrification continues its inevitable march, groups like Poles and Latinos are pushed beyond the boundaries of the city they helped build up. As the city of broad shoulders changes, growing upward and outward, it's important not to forget that it would not be the same without immigrants. And although these immigrants are gone, it's important that they are not forgotten.